This is lecture number DR014US08. This is the 14th of the Mega Genius lectures and the 8th lecture of the Uncommon Sense series. It was recorded on November 17th, 2000. The title of this lecture is The Wisest Investment. It is 30 minutes long. Copyright 2000 by Mega Genius. All rights reserved. This lecture is protected by internationally valid copyright. It may not, in whole or in part, be duplicated, transmitted, or otherwise reproduced without the express permission of Mega Genius. Unauthorized translation, importation, or distribution is a violation of applicable laws. Mega Genius is a United States federally registered trademark and service mark. And now, here is Mega Genius.
As a former Director of Corporate Communications and Public Affairs for a multi-billion-dollar financial services corporation, I may hold the world record for knowing the most financial planners, investment counselors, money managers, and financial services representatives. Just a few years ago, for example, I tallied just the stockbrokers whom I knew on a first-name basis, and it totaled 21,161. An average of 1,020 of them called me by telephone each day for advice, but I only had time to speak with briefly half that number. I remember the elderly client from Virginia who had no known living relatives, no religious affiliation, and no charity to whom he might direct the cash value of his life insurance policy. So he made the underwriting insurance company the sole beneficiary of the $500,000 death benefit. His explanation, quote, "I don't care who gets the money when I'm dead," unquote. And I recall, too, the 92-year-old gentleman from California with an 89-year-old wife who purchased a sizable annuity with monthly benefit payments to begin immediately. So far, so good. But instead of selecting a benefit option payable to someone for a specific number of years, he chose to receive monthly payments for only as long as he or his wife lived. In other words, unless at least one of them lived long enough to recoup the entire initial investment plus interest, there would be a substantial financial loss. But not to worry, he reasoned, quote, "My wife and I both come from families of peculiar longevity," unquote. Also, I'll always remember the telephone call from the stockbroker in New York City whose client had finally decided upon the proper vehicle in which to invest her life savings. The problem was that she had lived through the 1929 Depression and still, more than 50 years later, did not trust banks enough to enter one to convert to a cashier's check the substantial funds she kept hidden under her bed. Instead, the broker bemoaned, the only way the elderly woman would complete the investment was for me to agree to accept her $100,000 in cash by mail sent across the continent in a cardboard box. Then the broker whispered to me through the telephone, "She's piled it on my desk as I'm speaking to you." With both the woman's best interests at heart and the intent of protecting my license from the National Association of Securities Dealers, I respectfully declined. Consequently, she packed the whole kit and caboodle under her arm, left the broker's office, and headed home, where, as far as I know, she still sleeps as soundly as you or I. How one chooses to invest his money depends entirely upon his perception of the possibilities. In just those three examples, we have one person who is not planning to take it with him, one who is not intending to leave it behind, and another who would take a great risk to avoid a minor one. But one factor common to all investors, including each of those three, is that they want to use their money to accumulate greater value. Well, there are innumerable ways to do that, but I have seen a few mistakes repeated with remarkable frequency, even by seasoned investors. Here are 5 ways to avoid them. Number 1. Invest only in endeavors that you understand. If it's your money and your risk, then it's your decision. Don't depend upon someone else to understand your investment for you. It is up to you to know precisely what you are getting into and what's transpiring every step of the way. Get every question answered to your complete satisfaction before you sign anything, and don't allow anyone to rush you into anything. They say, he who hesitates is lost, but I say, it is better to lose opportunity than capital. Number 2, get the terms of the investment in writing. If it isn't written, it is not worth the paper it is not written on. That's risky. Deals are made according to contractual provisions. Take a few minutes to read and understand every one of them at the onset, or forever hold your peace. Number 3, before making any investment, consider safety, earnings ratio, and liquidity. Now that means understand the risk you will be taking, the amount of money you will be earning, and the speed and ease with which you will be able to convert the investment into currency. Safety and earnings tend to be inversely proportional. The greater the safety, the lesser the probable return, and the lesser the safety, the greater the possible return, providing it's a worthwhile investment. Unless you are investing with a financial genius, when the teeter rises, the totter falls, and you can bet your life savings on that. Number 4, before committing your funds, determine the investment's guaranteed return. A high interest rate on your investment does not guarantee a profitable return, a fact learned too often too late. The interest rate is only one of many pertinent factors. Familiarize yourself with all possible fees and conditional charges that might lower the effective interest rate. Be sure to calculate the exact and final figure that represents the amount of money you are guaranteed in writing to realize from the venture. Otherwise, you may discover that what you thought you were earning was exactly that, just a thought. Most investments that look too good to be true are. Number 5, control your risk. If you think that any investment is completely safe, examine it further. There is always some degree of risk. The amount of risk you wish to assume is entirely your discretion, but consider this rule of thumb. Never assume a risk so great that you cannot sleep comfortably at night. Remember, no investment is worth your loss of health and happiness. Now we will look at some of the future long-term trends of this planet, the most important thing you can know about money and what the wisest people do with their money. The most inaccurate science may be that of predicting the future, but there is nothing to it if one understands the past and the present. I recall reading in the 1950s in one of the world's most broadly circulated and reputable magazines that when the 1970s arrived, we would all be flying to our places of work in our own individual rocket ships. Most readers probably believed what they read, but like most predictions, it was an inaccurate shot in the dark. Do you believe the predictions you read? Do you trust scientists, politicians, and news analysts to understand the future? Do you assume psychics know more than you? For decades, I collected the predictions of the world's most famous psychics, many of whom I know personally, just to see how inaccurate they really were. In the end, you probably could have predicted better. In all cases, I found their predictions to be utterly unimpressive, and in almost all cases, their hits, of which they were most proud, to be cloaked in fraud. What they freely claimed to have predicted, and the exact and verifiable wording of what they had actually predicted, were worlds apart. Understandably, those who have a vested interest in the psychic's alleged success, and the psychics themselves, are invariably their most fervent supporters. In contrast, I will offer some general predictions on which you can rely. My intent is not to give you financial advice or indicate specific investment vehicles for your individual circumstances, but I will give you some long-term trends on which you can depend with certainty. They are not my personal opinions of how I think life should or should not be in the 21st century and well beyond. They are based solely on the Genius formula. Some of these predictions may be incredible and even encouraging to many and disheartening to a few, but they are the future. These are 10 subjects with rising stars. Number 1, various electronic communications. Because fast and extremely accurate transfer of information will become even more important. Number 2, computers and software. Because they speed and facilitate many forms of communication and analysis. Number 3, literacy. Because the population of the planet will desire published information of specific genres that will be considered essential to each person's survival. Number 4, vitamin supplementation. Because several vitamins in specific dosages and several vitamin combinations will be discovered to have previously unrecognized properties of an extremely beneficial nature. Number 5, effective drug rehabilitation. Because society will realize that drugs have long-term, significantly detrimental effects of a previously unrecognized character. Number 6, preventative medicine. Because it is a more rational, workable, and cost-effective approach. Number 7, environmentalism. Because a more ethical management of the planet will be imperative due to increasing population. Number 8, genetic engineering. Because it will be used to minimize key factors that will be contra-survival to man. Number 9, artistic exhibitions. Because man will become more aesthetically oriented. Number 10, criminal rehabilitation. Because it is a more intelligent, civil, and workable approach to crime. Now these are 10 subjects with falling stars. Some may not believe me today, but the future will prove me right. Again, these have nothing to do with my personal opinions of what should and should not be. Number 1, psychiatry. Because society will recognize it as a substandard and ineffective approach to mental health that suppresses symptoms rather than affects cures. Number 2, psychology. Because society will consider it to be an antiquated subject that is based on erroneous fundamentals. Number 3, radiation treatment. Because its pervasive effects will be determined to be usually worse than the ailments. Number 4, drug therapy. Because its particularly harmful side effects will be discovered and medical treatment with drugs will be gradually replaced with more effective and less physically invasive procedures. Number 5, chemotherapy. Because its particularly harmful side effects will be discovered and chemotherapy will be replaced with more advanced and effective technology. Number 6, hypnotism. Because it will be recognized as dangerous to one's mental health. Number 7, distant space exploration. Because our current technology for relocating human bodies across great distances to other star systems is fatally flawed. Number 8, alcohol consumption. Because it will be found to be conducive to the appearance and continuance of psychosomatic illnesses. Number 9, embalming and expensive funeral arrangements. Because a dead human body will widely be recognized as merely a rusting, worn-out machine. Number 10, common civil litigation. because a much more just and substantially different system of resolving legal differences will prevail. Now, these emphatic trends are undoubtedly the course of the future. Now let's search for the most important thing you can know about money. To some, money is worthless, but to many it is the blood of life. It all depends on how you think about it. For instance, years ago, when I lived in the Beverly Hills, California area, I recall an elderly woman near downtown Los Angeles in 1970 whose home was a mere shopping cart. With all of her worldly possessions in tow, a Chihuahua dog that rode shotgun, and a tobacco pipe that had seen better days clenched between her teeth, this pitiful-appearing human being seemed to exist in a world alone. Anastasia, as I nicknamed her, not knowing her real name, always appeared as if by magic on the same block of the same street, but only after dark. I never saw her arrive or depart. Rather, whenever I passed the location, she just was or she wasn't. In the midst of the Christmas and Hanukkah season, when most people seemed to be in their best spirits, Anastasia looked more displaced than ever, so I decided to do something about it. I bought an attractive jade necklace, a can of dog food, and a package of pipe cleaners, placed them all in a box that I covered with gold paper and a huge red bow, and set out to find Anastasia. She was already there, intent on examining some discarded item of garbage and purposefully unobservant of me as I approached. Was her reasoning that strangers were not likely to speak to her unless she looked at them? Or was it that the rest of the world had ignored her for so long that communication with another person no longer seemed real? I wondered. Probably I thought it's the latter. "I'd like you to have this," I said, thrusting the colorful package almost into her hands to ensure that it had entered the boundaries of her tiny universe. Instantly she jumped, and her little dog came to attention. As she stared at the gift, I edged it closer into her palms. She accepted, and then looked directly into the eyes of another human being for the first time since. Well, I acknowledged her with a smile, and then, to put her at ease, quickly continued on into the night. The following morning I returned to the scene of our encounter, curious to see what evidence I might find that would provide me with some insight about her response to the gifts. At first I saw nothing, but then spied the jade necklace, which she had tossed about 10 feet away behind a hibiscus bush. But then, who would have appreciated her wearing it? Then I found the can of dog food behind some bird of paradise plants. Well, I thought, what good was it to her without a can opener? But no matter how hard I tried, I could find no trace of those pipe cleaners. So I guess Anastasia had a happy holiday season after all. Well, as the months rolled along, I made a special effort to pass Anastasia on the sidewalk from time to time, always acknowledging her existence with a cheerful hello, and she always returned the greeting. Then one day I paused to inspect her little Chihuahua, which was riding, as always, on top of their mobile home. "Does he bite?" I asked. "I don't know," she answered, between sucks on her briar. "He won't bite me." Well, as I reached to pat the dog on its head, it began to lick my fingers. "He likes you," Anastasia observed excitedly, "but we usually keep to ourselves. People don't understand." Hesitating just long enough to pack down her tobacco, she continued, "They think we're different, but we're not. We're just like everybody else." Then Anastasia paused again, but this time it was to analyze my reaction. Confident she was finally being understood, she finished her thought. "The only thing they have that we don't is money." Conversely, money can be allowed to become the master, as it was for Howard Hughes, the famous American multi-billionaire, American hero, and top United States defense contractor. So captive was he, so subservient to his vast fortune, that in his attempt to recover the happiness he had known in his younger years, he became literally a hermit. As he saw it, his only alternative was to spend the remainder of his life in courts, defending his right to keep his money in opposition to the greed of others. In 1970, while serving on the board of directors of a foundation, I learned that Howard Hughes wanted to meet with me face to face. Even President Richard M. Nixon, I knew, had been unable to reach Howard Hughes directly by telephone. Since some magazines were offering considerable sums just for a single photograph of the man, I was not surprised when the time and location of the meeting were arranged with appreciable secrecy. When I was introduced to him, however, I realized the man I was shaking hands with could not be Mr. Hughes. Rather, I recognized him as a distinguished United States ambassador, who I also knew as a member of the Central Intelligence Agency and a member of President Richard M. Nixon's advance team to China. When I addressed him by his actual name, he laughed and explained that he was an alter ego for Mr. Hughes with full authority to conduct business on his behalf. He explained, quote, "Actually, I am only one of 3 such alter egos. There are many influential business people, high-level politicians, and even world leaders who believe they have spoken to Mr. Hughes by telephone, but really have only talked to one of the 3 of us." Unquote. Recognizing an opportunity to gain some insight into one of the more prominent mysteries of our times, I asked my friend the question being pondered by every network news anchor of the day. What is Howard Hughes really like? He paused, looked directly at me, and sighed, quote, "I don't actually know. I've never met the man." Unquote. Shortly thereafter, however, I learned what Howard Hughes was really like for myself. He was living in the penthouse of the Desert Inn in Las Vegas, Nevada, having bought the hotel and casino and several others to prevent being evicted from it. He was extremely emaciated, looking quite like one who was barely surviving a concentration camp, conducting his business empire totally naked in a darkened room with blacked-out windows from his bed, which he called the germ-free zone. He was in desperate need of a haircut, hearing impaired, but with no hearing aids, eating bowls of tiny pieces of soft chicken that employees had culled from innumerable cans of chicken noodle soup, storing his bodily waste in jars, bathing only with alcohol, addicted to Valium and injections of codeine, and shuffling about occasionally with empty tissue boxes on his feet for shoes. He was a perfect example of a man with a genius in one aspect of his life and a dearth of intelligence in another. The reclusive Mr. Hughes answered the question of what he was really like himself later. By telephone from the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, he addressed a panel of old friends in the United States on a nationwide television broadcast. After having proved his identity by addressing a series of personal questions that only the real Howard Hughes could have answered correctly, he was asked outright if he was happy. Then this motion picture financier, aviation pioneer, industrial giant, real estate magnate, this creator and destroyer of empires, whose fortune amounted to more than $1,000 for every day since the birth of Christ, answered without hesitation, quote, "No, I'm not." Unquote. The multi-billionaire Howard Hughes and poor Anastasia lived worlds apart, separated by money and the lack thereof. Yet both were bizarre in appearance, reclusive, alone, and fearful, and both continuously suffered from a failure to understand. Anastasia did not appreciate that money is the grease of life. A little more of it could have eased the friction and softened the journey of life for an old woman whose spirit was easily lifted by a mere package of pipe cleaners. Howard Hughes did not understand that great wealth is only worth having as long as having it is fun. Wealth can appear to be the primary component of happiness, but one should never forget that the resultant happiness is created by the person himself, not the money. On the day that one forgets that and begins to look to money to create his happiness for him, he will soon know true poverty in spite of his apparent wealth. Paul Gauguin, the French painter, understood this when he said, quote, "Ignorant savages have taught us civilized beings a great, great deal about being happy." Unquote. Would you believe that at least 99.9% of the population fail to understand the most important thing one can know about money? It's true. It's a secret that neither Anastasia nor Howard Hughes grasped, is beyond the intelligence of most economists, bankers, financial planners, money managers, and investment counselors, and is worth more than all the gold on this planet. It's the most intelligent answer to what one can and should do with his money. Let's look at it. Having money is only one side of the coin. The reverse side is spending it. You can save it, invest it, secure it, hoard it, or bury it. But no matter what you do, someone has to spend it before anyone can get anything out of it. Money is like fireworks. Unless it's eventually expended, it isn't of any value. Some persons spend it as soon as they can get their hands on it, enjoying a rapid series of individual bangs. Others save it throughout their lives for a go-for-broke show of pyrotechnics near the end. Still others take pleasure in passing some of the wallop to other generations. This, however, is clear. None but the wisest ever get their money's worth. Amazingly, most people are severely mentally deficient in the art of spending money. I'll explain. It has been said that a fool and his money are soon parted. But it is not true that one who soon parts with his money is necessarily a fool. For example, when I was young and not too foolish, I accumulated a considerable amount of money in a short time, and quickly spent a significant portion in a single day. When friends learned what I had done, I received many "we hardly know ye" looks. But what was really important was not whether I was possessed, but what I possessed. Eventually they or their heirs would spend their money too. The important factor was the value of what I purchased. Was it worth more than I spent? And how much more? From a friend's viewpoint, I had blown a fortune with nothing to show for it. Absolutely nothing at all. From my perspective, I had invested my funds wisely indeed. I did not buy tangibles such as real estate, automobiles, or yachts. Neither did I buy lesser tangibles like stocks and bonds, nor jewelry. I did not even purchase such intangibles as recreation or vacations. Instead, I used the genius formula to identify the most important aspects of life and then to determine those specific areas in which I needed to expand my knowledge. Then I used my funds in a workable manner to acquire a higher level of the only true wealth that exists: understanding. Now, exactly how I did it is beside the point. What is worth knowing is that some things are more worth knowing than others. Something else worth knowing is that, and this is a mega-truth, an understanding of anything is always worth more than the thing itself. Advertisements and temptations abound to induce you to become the proud owner of as many widgets, gadgets, and objects as you have funds to expend or can borrow. But on the last day of your lifetime, you will not have obtained all that you wanted. And the things that you will have accumulated will not have brought you all the happiness that you anticipated. You came into this existence with nothing tangible, and that is exactly the way you will leave. But remember this: the soundest financial advice you will ever receive. When the last moment of your human lifetime expires, and it will before you are ready, there is only one thing of value that you will have left and that you will take with you. This is a mega truth. An investment in understanding is truly the wisest investment of all.